Hey, good Monday to you guys. We're just waiting for Facebook to jump off, and then we'll get going on official stuff. Usually Facebook is the one that it's like, oh, the system clock says 12:29. Facebook is already live and broadcasting. So I gotta watch it like a hawk. But no, today decided to make an ass out of me, so somebody comes and watches on Facebook, they're going to be like, what'd I miss? He's already talking. I'm going to talk about that mini in a minute. So anyway, official good morning to you. So the thumbnail picture that I used, and maybe I could have used like a paperback book or something instead, since I wanted to talk a little bit about Appendix N, amongst other things. That is the Grenadier 5002 Red Dragon's Lair from the Gold Box collection, made specifically for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for TSR. Now, I don't know who sculpted it, but I do know that nobody picked the mold up. If it still exists out there and wasn't just broken up or thrown away, there's no telling who has it. I have one. I have one complete. No, it's not in box. I'm working on getting it painted. I'll show it off one day. But the Dragon's Lair mini, it was like a jewel in the crown for me. Primarily because it comes with cool little glass gems that you stick on it, and one gigantic diamond that you actually put in the claw of the dragon. I love that piece, and I'm dying to get it done. I got one in 2005, I think. I found it. It was not on eBay. It was not an eBay purchase. It was a pickup from just an online retailer, just an online antiques and thrift store, and I think I paid the princely sum of $36 for it. You can find them in greater or lesser conditions and degrees of completeness. I was so happy to find mine not only new in box not only complete in box, but with the gems, with a little wax paper packet of gems that Grenadier included. And I'm so looking forward to painting it one day and sticking all the gems in the treasure pile. It did. It had 2 dragon eggs, a dragon hatching out of an egg, a treasure pile, which was to be used as the base, and of course the dragon herself, and the aforementioned gems. Now, one thing about the base, I did not attach my mini to the base. I bought a Secret Weapons mini base and instead mounted the dragon on that, and then I can have the base if I want just like a massive treasure pile for elsewhere in my dungeon that doesn't entail, the dragon. I can put it there. Or I can have the dragon guarding the treasure pile but moving along, with the base underneath it. So that's what I did. But yeah, it's a lovely piece, and I am looking forward to painting it up. Friday, we had an okay Friday. Yang Yan's Zhao was here, and we talked about religion in D&D and real world religions, and it was a lot of fun to have him on. And I'm going to do his show next. I hope you are paying attention. No, I hope you had an easy time listening to the audio on that stream. And the reason I say that is because, okay, here's the deal. My studio PC that I'm streaming off of right now is a quad-core 4th Gen i5, 8 gigs of 1333 RAM. I have a GT730 in there. A GT1030 in there. It's just a very basic, simple Office PC. It's an old Dell Optiplex 3090, I think. I mean, if somebody wanted to do what like a hojillion YouTubers do these days, because hardware is next to fucking impossible to find, and buy one of these and dump like a 1060 or a 1050 in, and double the RAM and put in, put a 4th gen i7 K series processor in it and make it into a gaming system, you very easily could. Hey, Bo. I thought you couldn't make it today, but it's good to see you anyway. So you could do all of those things, and that would be just, fine and dandy. But when I got this, a client gave me this because they had malware. They had a malware infection before I started working there, and the IT guy traced it back to that computer. And because it was ransomware, and it really screwed things up bad for them, they... thank you, Adam. They quarantined the computer completely. And when I was cleaning out their IT closet, they're like, that's a broken printer. That's a broken printer that monitors, just shows a white line across the middle, blah, 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 blah. So get rid of this stuff for us. And I said, but not this PC, right? And they're like, oh no, especially that PC. So I was like, okay, what's wrong with it? And they explain. They seem to think that if you took the hard drive out and skipped it across the parking lot a couple of times, that the computer hardware itself would still somehow automatically be infected. So I brought home a 4th gen i5 at a time when that was still a not inconsiderable machine, and they're still good for light gaming. Look, the point of all this is, it is nothing compared to my gaming rig, which is on the other side of the studio. My gaming rig is a 4th gen i7 K series CPU with a 1650 video card, 4 gigs of VRAM on that. 16 gigs of DDR3 1600, and NVMe hard drive and everything like that. Friday, the performance of OBS sucked. OBS and Facebook both were like, your audio isn't working. Everything is bad. Your stream is a garbage fire. Everything that could be bad is bad right now. Stop streaming and fix these issues. The entire time. And I was watching the... there's a little light. Well, there's a little graphic indicator in the far lower right-hand corner that is varying stages of yellow and red, and green is the best in OBS. So I'm watching that thing just strobe down in the hot colors. I was absolutely certain that Friday was going to be just a disaster. It was going to be one of those that I would not archive, that I would not put up. So, you're quite welcome, Maxim. That's Maxim over on Facebook said, thanks for this video. You're very welcome. Don't thank me yet. It could still suck. So yeah, my big romper stomper powerhouse i7 PC, according to OBS and Facebook and YouTube, was dying. It was like a complete garbage fire in terms of keeping data going out. My little office PC, that the only things I've done for it is give it just a SATA SSD and the aforementioned GT 1030. Yeah, what just beat the pants off of it. It's rock solid. The only thing I can think, and I don't even think this is a thing, is like I shut down my browser. I have 78 tabs. That's not an exaggeration. That's not an overstatement. Looking at the PC on the far side of the room, I know that I have 78 tabs open in my browser. So consequently, my browser is eating about 3.5 gigs of RAM. So I thought maybe that's doing it. So I closed it real quickly. I just pulled out a tab for monitoring Facebook and one for monitoring YouTube, and I closed my browser. Nope, performance did not get better. I killed every background task I could while I was talking to Yang, and nothing helped. So I don't know what was going on with OBS and Discord and my PC on Friday. So if the audio was screwed up, which Adam says it wasn't, I apologize. IR says, I just inherited a quad-core i7 16 gig, 1 terabyte HP Z2 because they couldn't get it to join the domain. That's hilarious. Go on eBay and bang a 4 gig GTX 960 in there, and you will have a machine that can play every AAA title that's out right now, except for Cyberpunk. You won't get good results in Cyberpunk. But that's literally all you have to do to make that into a gaming rig. Oh, and obviously a SATA hard drive. So that's my little story of IT angst. Hello, Mike Holland. No Man's Sky will run fine on that rig. If it's a 4 gig 960, No Man's Sky better run on it, because No Man's Sky came out in 2017, 2018. No, it was before then. I know it was before. It was early 2017 that it came out. But anyway. So I hope everyone enjoyed the audio, and I hope it wasn't too rucked up on Friday. If you go back and watch the video and the audio stinks on ice, that's why. Yeah, 2016. So it's almost a 6-year-old game. I'm having a lot of fun playing Fallout 3. I'm just about done with it. I've just about got all the flavor chewed out of this run this time. I added a couple of mods to Fallout 3 on this run. Once I figured out how to add and manage Fallout 3 mods, I put in a level uncapper just to give me something to look forward to as I played along. But it's kind of ridiculous because it like increases the potential damage you can do with your weapons as you level up. So now like the shitty weapons you get off raiders even are a threat to most monsters except for rad scorpions, which are awful and shouldn't be in the game. And after I completed 2 specific quests, the main quest of the core Fallout 3, the Waters of Life, where you are helping your father create an invention that purifies water in the DC wasteland. And then there's a side quest called Oasis, and in the base unmodded game, there is the only section of the game that has green forests and greenery is a rift valley called Oasis, and you can go in and you can do some quests. And they talk about if you do the quest a certain way, they talk about slowly spreading Oasis's influence over the course of a decade out across and making the capital wasteland green again. So I downloaded a mod. Hello, Ricky Murray. I downloaded a mod that adds forests and trees and green grass and so on to Fallout 3. And the reason I did that was not just because I wanted to mod the game. I didn't install it until after I'd completed those 2. And I don't know if you played Fallout 3. The game is gray and brown. It's just gray and brown. That's it. Gray and brown everywhere. And this at least put a splash of color into just a lead colored game. Just like chunks of lead buried in sand. And I get it. It has an aesthetic. It's supposed to be after nuclear war. 20 years after the Chernobyl disaster, forest had crept into Pripyat, and Pripyat is now a collection of buildings in the middle of a forest in Ukraine. So, yeah, 200 years after nuclear war, there's going to be some regrowth. So I figured, after the Waters of Life and after the Oasis mission, the forests come back. So that's what I did. That's how I modded it. And I maintain that you could probably use Fallout as a bit of a basis for a Gamma World game. I think you could have a lot of fun playing a Gamma World game. Just read up on all the Fallout lore and how it's different from Gamma World, but then use Gamma World as your base set of rules. Now, if I could do something about how the United States got stuck in a late 1940s time warp for 130 years. Gamma World is awesome. Mike, have you ever played First Edition Gamma World? It is fantastic. I should get Jim back on the show soon and let him wax on about the development of Gamma World. In fact, I think I'm going to do that. Also, Traveler is a good game. Hopefully this week, I'm knocking on wood, hopefully this week we're going to have Tracy Lesh on the live stream. So that is the hope. Mike says he just started playing Traveler and he owns the original stuff. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome, Mike. Can I touch on bows versus crossbows briefly? Bows have a higher rate of fire. They're cheaper. They're more readily available. I mean, what specifically did you want to ask me about bows? If you have specific question about bows in AD&D, I will be more than happy to answer them. If you have specific question about bows in Gamma World, or bows in Foss's Star Trek the Role-Playing Game, which shoot further than the phaser rifle. But anyway, while IR gets his question ready, I know recently, I don't remember the exact stream, but recently, are there arrow limitations? Could you clarify that? IR, Imperial Ramblings over on YouTube asks about bows and are there arrow limitations, and you clarify that a little bit for me, and we'll do that. Crossbows use I'm sorry, that's your question. Crossbows use bolts. You find bolts in cases. Arrows are in sheaths or quarrels, or sheaths or I have quivers. That's it, not quivers. Arrows are in sheaths or quivers, and crossbow bolts are in cases. But they are very different items in terms of what you shoot out of them. I would not let you fire in my AD&D game. I would not let you fire an arrow out of a crossbow. It would strip the fletches off, causing it to tumble. It just click. and just fall on the ground. Maybe it might go a foot or two, but it would never have an opportunity to break something, set something on fire if you lit it, except your foot. Just carry any distance at all. So no, you don't use a ballista from your backpack. Speaking of open world sandbox first person shooters, that is almost exactly what you get apparently in the released next month Far Cry game. One of the weapons your character has is an MLRS they carry on their back. It's like four or eight mortar pipes, you know. Notwithstanding the fact that would literally blow your head off if you fired it. Yes, they are completely different animals in D&D. Now, you may run a game system so abstract like Torchbearer or something like that, where you've just got missile weapon. But, you know, that's up to you. Mike says, I played every major Far Cry. Can't wait for this. I totally fell head over heels in love with Far Cry New Dawn, but I feel like it was a wasted opportunity. Like, I think the next Far Cry game should have been a bigger Far Cry New Dawn set in a post-apocalypse America with more stuff to do and more stuff to explore. But it was literally just a non-canon sidequel DLC pack, really. You can loose arrows from certain kinds of crossbows, but it can break the string and may break the knock of the arrow. I wouldn't get into it. I wouldn't get into it. I would not. I mean, the certain kind of arrow is called a crossbow bolt. I mean, that's... And it doesn't break when you fire it. Now, we've talked about secondary skills in AD&D, and one of the possible skill sets that a character can get is Bowyer Fletcher. If you were desperate for it and you had, say, you know, a magical crossbow, or which would include, you know, a crossbow of speed or a crossbow of accuracy or something like that, but you're like, shit, we're really deep in this dungeon and we're out of arrows, and somebody in the party, or we're out of bolts, and somebody in the party said, hey, I'm a Bowyer Fletcher, can we take, you know, half of Legolam's arrows and make bolts out of them? I would absolutely allow it. I'd say just roll a d6 for every one you want to modify. If you roll a 1, you ruin it. On a 2 through 6, you make a bolt. You successfully make a bolt. You know, just roll a handful of d6s and discount the 1s, and the rest are good bolts. Is what I would do. So, and yeah, it would have to be significant downtime. It wouldn't be something you would do like, okay, we know across this chasm and through a couple of caverns are some orcs. We're going to go tackle them in 20 minutes. Let's make a few crossbow quarrels. No. That's something that you spent, like, you know, you hole up in a cavern that you know is safe, you ward it, and so on and etc. You spend a half a day there making, and time-wise, I would say, 20 minutes a bolt. So that's what I would do. That's how I would rule making arrows into quarrels. But generally speaking, you just buy them by the case. It's not an issue. So let's talk then a little bit about Appendix N, a little bit more, because I know we've talked some about Appendix N. But if you're kind of late to the game, if you're one of those folks who's coming in, and it's fine if you are. I'm not judging. I'm not over here saying, "Oh, bar, 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 bar. My neck beard is more bristly than yours." Gary was a lover of fantasy literature. And like so many of us who grew up in this era, this was before there was D&D literature, because this was before D&D. So Gary feasted on EC comics, the works of H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, Grimm's fairy tales, folk stories told by his grandparents, and then modern American fantasy pulps by Poul Anderson, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Robert E. Howard, Jack Vance, L. Sprague de Camp, Lynn Carter, Gardner Fox, so on and etc. And all of those, to a greater or lesser extent, I'm going to share this up on the screen, and we'll just kind of go down and talk about inspirational reads here a little bit. Let's see, there's OBS, and we'll just switch this on. There we go. So down in the corner, out on the street, we have Appendix N, inspirational reading, and we're going to go through the paragraph here as we have before. But again, I think for some folks just coming in, for some folks who've just subscribed, which, by the way, speaking of subscriptions, we're almost to 790 subs now. I think we're at like 786 or 787. I'll have to look. But it's pretty damn awesome, because you guys know what happens when we hit 1,000, right? 786 subs on the channel. 786. Which is really super cool. You guys know what happens when you hit 1,000 subs. Mike, go find like a crap load of your gaming buddies and have them sub to my channel. Like if you've got 200 something friends, have them sub to the channel so we can do the mini con. So Appendix N. Inspiration for all the fantasy work I have done stems directly from the love my father showed when I was a lad, for he spent many hours telling me stories he made up as he went along, tales of cloaked old men who could grant wishes, of magic rings and enchanted swords, or wicked sorcerers and dauntless swordsmen. Then, too, countless hundreds of comic books went down, and the long-gone EC ones certainly had their effect. Science fiction, fantasy, and horror movies were a big influence. In fact, all of us tend to get ample helpings of fantasy when we are very young, from fairy tales such as those written by the brothers Grimm and Andrew Lang. This often leads to reading books of mythology, paging through bestiaries, and consultation of compilations of the myths of various lands and people. Upon such a base, I built my interest in fantasy, being an avid reader of all science fiction and fantasy literature since 1950. The following authors were a particular inspiration to me. In some cases, I cite specific works. In others, I simply recommend all their fantasy writing to you. From such sources, as well as just about any other imaginative writing or screenplay, you will be able to pluck kernels of knowledge from which grow the fruits of exciting campaigns. Good reading. So let's break this down, and let's take a bit of a closer look than we have in the past. I've kind of railed about the tendency of folks in the past to treat this as a secret key, a secret decryption key to understanding AD&D, and it's not. It's not. Okay? The secret decryption key for understanding AD&D is the AD&D rules themselves. Recursive, yes. A tautology, absolutely. But there is no hidden Salvador Dali like level of understanding you have to get AD&D. Beyond the clarifications that we've discussed on the lessons and so forth, these books are not some secret thing. So when people say, magic users can't use swords, Gandalf could use a sword. Aren't you screwing things up, Gary? Because you say Tolkien is one of the influences of D&D. I mean, guys, it's not it. That ain't it. That ain't it. So let's go on. First, we've got Poul Anderson, 3 Hearts and 3 Lions. 3 Hearts and 3 Lions is a hugely influential book to AD&D. From 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, we have trolls that regenerate and have that horrid, skinny, rubbery look to themselves. So the wiry black hair, the black pit eyes, the big, huge banana noses. They are described just so in Poul Anderson's 3 Hearts and 3 Lions. Paladins. The Paladin's protection from evil, the Paladin's warhorse, the Paladin's holy sword that can hold off evil creatures, the Paladin's ability to just repel evil creatures in general, his lay on hands, his cure disease and immunity to disease, and his ability to lose those powers if he catches himself in a moment of blasphemy. All of these things are by necessity from 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, of course, with a heaping help of Gary Gygax's interpretation. The Swan May. They don't really make an appearance until the second edition, the Monster Manual 2, which kind of surprises me, but the Swan May is in here, and a Swan May is a human woman who can basically transmogrify herself into the shape of a swan. They are always good, and a very high percentage of them are rangers. I think her name was Eleonora. It's been a while since I've read 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, but the Swan May that Holger meets and that adventures with him shows some ranger talents and abilities. So 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, critical book. The High Crusade, we were just talking about Gamma World and post-apocalypse settings and so on. The High Crusade is an amazing book. It is hilarious. Like, I busted a gut reading the High Crusade. Aliens land on Earth in southern England in the 9th century in the middle of a medieval town and set about to saying, oh yeah, we're going to collect up, it's a scout ship. It's a large, they call it a metal castle. And they say, okay, we're here. We're going to make your backwards little planet part of our star empire. What they don't count on is that just because their technology lags behind, the humans aren't stupid. No, they're quite resourceful and quite vicious. And they murder a bunch of the aliens, then hold the rest of them hostage to take off into space. And they set about conquering a section of the galaxy all their own once they understand the alien technology. But it is essentially medieval types fighting against aliens with swords and shields and so on. It is just a great adventure. And I mean, they figure out how to set the proximity detonator on tactical nuclear weapons, but they don't know how the missile systems work. So they take down alien fortresses using trebuchets that they load nuclear warheads into. The warheads are clean enough and localized enough that the distance a trebuchet can throw them is sufficient to not kill the trebuchet crew and the knights and so forth gathered around. Now, because they're not being fired by missiles, the aliens believe that the humans have stealth-launched nuclear weapons. That's how good the High Crusade is. The Broken Sword. The Broken Sword is a Viking saga, and it is a saga exactly in the sense of a Viking story. Anderson steals from Tolkien for the names of a couple of dwarves, but then Tolkien stole from Nordic stories and so on and etc. himself, and says as much. He's like, if Tolkien's going to take, Nordic influences into the Lord of the Rings and call them his own, so am I. So Balin and Dwalin make an appearance in The Broken Sword. Recommended listening for The Broken Sword, put No Quarter by Led Zeppelin on a loop and listen to it. Because it very well describes, I know, Led Zeppelin and fantasy music. What you're going to tell me next? They consumed lots of drugs and got a lot of hippie girl tail? I mean, John Bellaire's The Face in the Frost is not a novel I've read, but I'm going to pause there and I'm going to leap back. There's one other Poul Anderson fantasy story that I think you should absolutely check out, A Midsummer's Tempest, because like Three Hearts and Three Lions, it deals with medieval Europe, but with fantasy trappings on it as well. But it also says, okay, what if Shakespeare's The Tempest really happened in the midst of the English Civil War? So it's a really damn fine read. The Face in the Frost, I have not read. I've been told that I would like it. Lee Brackett's fantasy and science fiction works are phenomenal. I can't recommend any off the top of my head. You should go through and check that out. Frederick Brown, same. Edgar Rice Burroughs, Pellucidar series, Mars series, Venus series. The Pellucidar is a massive dungeon crawl because it is a hollow world. It's your characters are literally going into a hollow world setting, and I know that was real big with basic and expert D&D fans, the idea of a hollow world. Hello, Landon. Hello, Samuel Lee. Good to see you. Sorry. Having a little trouble with Acrobat. Yeah, but the Pellucidar series has modern at the time, late 1800s, early 1900s, gentlemen adventurers going to what they think is going to be the Earth's core, but they discover a massive under-earth world with a fixed sun in the middle of it that never sets nor rises, so timekeeping is next to impossible. It's good stuff. It's really good stuff. The Mars series, John Carter of Mars, regardless of the Disney movie, but if you saw it and you liked it, that's awesome. John Carter of Mars is a phenomenal series of stories. It is Raygun Punk, I think that's a thing. Science fiction. It's Sword and Planet. That's it. Sword and Planet romance. John Carter is an Earthman who finds himself transported across time and space from his near death in the American southwestern deserts to Mars, And his unique human physiology makes him essentially a Superman on Mars. He can leap great distances, jump from great heights without injury. He is immune to the natural telepathy that Martian men and women, all beings of Mars, are possessed of. And by his own hand, over the course of many stories, he forges his own kingdom. He takes Dejah as his queen. He has a son who shows up in later stories. It is a fantastic series. There are even other Earthmen that show up on Mars. Ulysses Paxton shows up and fights the terrible mastermind. Well, actually, he works for the mastermind of Mars, but then goes against him and rescues people that the mastermind had sent away. The mastermind being a incredibly brilliant scientist who has mastered the transference of brains from one body to the next, and limb and organ transplants and so on and etc. Very forward-looking guy. The Venus series is much like the Mars series, but it is very tongue-in-cheek. Do check out the Venus series if you get a chance. It's less well-known than the Mars series, but it's good fun. Lynn Carter, The World's End series, good read. I'm told, I haven't read it. L. Sprague de Camp's Lest Darkness Fall is a hell of a good story. The protagonist is in Italy in the 1920s, just at the rise of Mussolini. In fact, he makes some comments to his tour guide who says, well, yeah, but, don't you think he's doing great things for getting the country back together? And he's very dubious of that. But by means that aren't completely explained, it's a fantasy story. I'm the DM. I ain't got to explain shit. The protagonist finds themselves transported back to the year 733, at the nadir of the Roman Empire. And he is a scholar of the Roman Empire. And he sees a chance to stop the fall of the final collapse of the Roman Empire. And he sets about, with nothing more than his wits, trying to convince various Roman officials. And it's not the simple story that you might think. Like, oh, okay, he invents gunpowder and he's like, the spread of information has got to be able to help with this. He doesn't know how to make paper. Papyrus and other items are what the Romans use. And that's a terrible medium for trying to make a distributable paper. And then ink that works on a moving type system. And a whole bunch of other inventions that you think, man, if I could go back to the Roman Empire, I'd be a hell-ass king. I would just invent computers. Well, even assuming you were an electrical engineer with a degree in chip fabrication, whatever that entails, how would you even begin to explain to the Romans the hows and whys of how to build to generate electricity for the lights, for the chip creation ovens, for the clean rooms you would need? And you'd have to spend decades developing the precision required. And so he runs into some of those problems. Not computers, because the book was written in the 1930s. But, he struggles with all of these things, but eventually, well, read the book. Haven't read The Fallible Fiend. L. Sprague de Camp and Pratt, the Harold Shea series, have not read, nor The Carnelian Cube. August Derleth. Now, I'm going to hold out against Gary on August Derleth here. August Derleth did do a lot for the preservation of the work of H.P. Lovecraft. A lot of people who say, I love Lovecraft's work, but I don't like August Derleth. You wouldn't know who H.P. Lovecraft was without August Derleth's efforts. But August Derleth's contributions to the Lovecraft mythos are poor. He basically recast Lovecraft's mythos into the Old Testament. That there are good elder things and that there are bad elder things, and that our understanding of the war in heaven was a battle between the old ones and the elder gods and the outer gods, and he kind of stratified it a little bit more. Lovecraft wanted his work to be more mysterious and horrible, to be utterly alien, to be as different from our understanding of dead gods as ants' understandings of us. So, appreciate August Derleth for his contribution to the preservation of Lovecraft's work, but his own stuff is a little meh. Sorry, and just... Best book I read this is Shadow of Ender by Orson Scott Card. I have never read any of the Ender books other than Ender's Game. I have only ever read Ender's Game by Card. Let's see. Lord Dunsany. I have talked so much about how I love The King of Elfland's Daughter. Lots of D&D influence in there. And I missed something. I was talking earlier about the Mars series. Yes, TSR did publish a war game with some role-playing elements in it called Warriors of Mars. It is super duper rare. Good luck finding a copy for less than a couple $1,000, because the Burroughs estate shut them down very quickly after that was released. Because it was only, at that point, it was only like 40 years after the passing of Edgar Rice Burroughs, not the 70 required to release that. Nowadays, you can reprint Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars books and write games and movies and everything else about them. I don't think the estate is holding on to them anymore. But The World of Tears by Philip Jose Farmer. Farmer was a fantastic science fiction and fantasy author. The World of Tears series is really good because it does introduce some things that show up in D&D, and it modifies some things that show up in D&D. Planar travel, dimension door spell, magical instruments show up in the World of Tears series, and some monsters we're already familiar with. Harpies, which are less just want to eat you and more want to kill and eat you, but they're willing to listen to reason in exchange for certain acts. Now, there's a critter called the Weemic, which is kind of a lion. It's a slightly more believable looking centaur that I think Gary plucked out of the World of Tears series, or at least was strongly influenced with. They're smaller, they're more lion bodies than they are horses. Check out the World of Tears series and tell me what you think. Gardner Fox. Now, I've read two things. I've read two series by Gardner Fox. His Kothar series in The Dragon, early issues of The Dragon, and some, how shall we say, spy parodies, some James Bond parodies that are not really, I can't go into the details on them, but the The Kothar series that got printed in The Dragon, I think he was highly influenced by D&D rather than influencing D&D. So, it's a good mention, but Gardner Fox's fantasy stuff is a good read. Robert E. Howard, Conan series. So much D&D came from that we're going on 50 minutes here. I could literally spend another 2 hours just talking about D&D influences brought from Conan. And my studio lamp just failed. So, thank you. So we'll not dwell here too long, other than to say it is... Let me just show you something. Just waiting. The word Conan shows up many times in the Dungeon Master's Guide. I don't know why Adobe is dragging ass. Maybe it's just because it's so many. But this is not the only place where Conan appears in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I think that should tell you something. Sterling Lanier's Hero's Journey is on my to-do list. I haven't read it. Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and Grey Mouser is probably the second biggest influence in AD&D. Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser are extraordinary guys, and they are an extraordinary influence on D&D in general. We get some of the Bard class, some of the Ranger. I think that some Ranger influences are brought from that. 99% of the Thief class, as it is in AD&D, comes from Fafhrd and Grey Mouser because they are notorious thieves. And something I did miss, something I was gonna mention this because I glanced down and saw Michael Moorcock. A lot of people think that the Michael Moorcock stories are where alignment comes from in D&D. Not so. That's another one from 3 Hearts and 3 Lions. Came out before Moorcock wrote his turgid sword and sorcery books. But law, chaos, and neutrality are all present there and mentioned as such. Beings of chaos, kingdoms of law, those who are neutral, and so on. I have read a little bit of A. Merritt, and I can tell you, from what I've read, it might have influenced Gary's Greyhawk campaign somewhat. But I can't put my finger on any one of those books that I have specifically read. But read them just the same. They're good. They're good stuff. Michael Moorcock, Stormbringers, Hawkmoon series. I would add to that the Quorum series. Intelligent swords, aligned swords, soul-stealing swords. Again, a strong pillar of the alignment system comes from here. Now, Andre Norton got short shrift because she had finished, she had finished Quag Keep by this point. She and Gary were friends, and she wrote Quag Keep, the first ever D&D novel. Andrew Offit edited Swords Against Darkness 3. I have not read that compilation. I can't tell you what the influence would be, but check it out just the same. Fletcher Pratt, I know the name, but I can't testify as to how good that is or isn't. Fred Saberhagen. I grew up loving Fred Saberhagen's Berserker stories. I'm told that his Book of Swords and Changeling Earth and so on are phenomenal and that I need to go read them. I will one day, I promise. Margaret St. Clair, Never read anything by her. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Hobbit, and the Ring trilogy. The Lord of the Rings was one book, Gary. It only got chopped up into 3 when it was pirated and brought to America, but that's for another discussion. And we're going to come back to that because a lot of people think, like, again, I was making my mocking statement about, oh, Gandalf uses a long sword. Why don't... Gandalf is not the prototype for an AD&D magic user. Gandalf is a Maiar. He is an angel, which makes him a Solar or a Planetar. At very least, an Astral Diva. Jack Vance, Eyes of the Overworld, The Dying Earth, et al. Yes, Jack Vance, hugely influential in AD&D, particularly the Dying Earth series, of which the Eyes of the Overworld is part. Kujal the Clever, all of those just really good reads. Go get you some Jack Vance. If you want it, particularly if you want to know about Prismatic Spray, the spell Prismatic Spray, why D&D magic works the way it does. You know, oh, you cast a spell and you forget it. No. Read Jack Vance and understand the why of those spells. Stanley Weinbaum, no idea. Manly Wade Wellman, nope. Jack Williamson, too numerous to mention. And Roger Zelazny, Jack of Shadows, the Amber books. Which there was actually an Amber diceless role-playing game. The characters in the Amber series are essentially demigods. They are deathless demigods. Two friends, or is it a pair of brothers? I can't remember, but they're having an argument, and one of them, in a fit of pique, picks up a car and throws it out of the way. That's how powerful they are. But if you want to know about how petty gods can be in a D&D game, read the Amber series. I think Gary's got his little note here at the bottom. The most immediate influences upon AD&D were probably DeCamp and Pratt, Robert E. Howard, Fritz Leiber, Jack Vance, Lovecraft, and A. Merritt. But all of the above authors, as well as many not listed, certainly helped to shape the form of the game. For this reason, and for the hours of reading enjoyment, I heartily recommend the works of these fine authors to you. Now, people take that paragraph and they run with it. Like I said, they think this is a decryption key for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Your reading the rules is the decryption key. Yes, there are elements that come from these, but Gary makes them into his own. He wasn't trying just to emulate the books. He was taking good ideas and fitting them in to D&D. Now, let me tell you something here as we kind of come to the conclusion of this. I am not a huge fan of D&D literature. Gary Scored the Rogue books aren't great. They're okay. Quag Keep is okay. But as far as Dragonlance books, Forgotten Realms books, there were Dark Sun books, there were Ravenloft books, there were, which I thought Ravenloft was set in Forgotten Realms. I don't know. There were books for almost every D&D setting published. TSR got to the point where there were rumblings that they were considering selling off the game and just continuing to publish novels, because the novels in the 90s were making more, in the 80s and 90s, were making more than the role-playing game was. I don't know how true this is. Maybe we can ask Jim that the next time we have Jim on the show. But, and this is important, like them or not, when D&D became its own thing and started making novels about D&D, when it became recursive, was a really good thing, I feel. And the reason is, again, so many people think that Appendix N is dogma, and that you have to figure out that, like, there's a reading challenge, that unless you've read all of these and you have to figure out how each and every one of them intrinsically fits into AD&D, otherwise you don't understand AD&D, it's wrong. That is a wrong mindset. These are just good books that Gary liked, and he thought you might like them too. There's a similar set of suggested reading in the back of basic D&D. There's one in Star Frontiers. But it's not a secret guide to how AD&D works. Gary just liked the books. And yes, there's a lot of things you can take away, but then there's a lot of things you can't. You know? There's a lot of stuff you can't. So just keep that in mind. If you go through Appendix N, if you look at Appendix N and you're like, I have to read all these, I have to understand this to understand how D&D works, don't beat yourself up. Don't put yourself in an emotional crisis over how you think D&D is only comprehensible. Like, Bill never covered this. Maybe it's in these books. No. The books are simply good reading, and good reading they are. But what are you reading? What are you reading that's influencing your D&D games? Tower of the Elephant was one of the best. Yes, that's a good Conan story. Adam says, my first D&D game experience was BX Bot set of rules and my brother's Conan paperback. They work so well together. Oh man, see, that's it. Zelazny's Creatures of Light and Darkness. Well, I'll have to read that. I'll put that on. Are there people so obtuse they think Appendix N is something? Yes. I have bitched and I have complained about the OSR intelligentsia that just seemed to spring up from the early 2000s, like 2007, 2008, 2009, and cast its baleful shadow across the hobby probably till about 2015, when guys like me finally said, you know what? I don't give a fuck. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care. I'm not paying attention to you. I don't care. But these people were out there publishing blog posts and commenting on Google Plus threads. That piece of shit. About, I've had read all the Harold Shea books, and I'm currently going through Gardner Fox, and I'm now getting an understanding of how, why dungeons are, halls are 10 feet wide and 10 feet long and 10 feet high, and you go, one square. It's like, no, you're not. You're engaging in navel gazing. You're trying to play smarter than thou. It was just a bunch of people rambling on about Appendix N to get people looking at them. And we can't stand that, can we? Beowulf, yeah. Beowulf, The Song of Roland. Other stuff like Marx. That better be Groucho Marx. Don't want no commies in here. Chris says, rereading the Divine Comedy. That's a great one to understand the politics of hell. Some Poul Anderson and some Jack Vance to follow. You're going to have a good time. You're going to have a good time reading Poul Anderson and Jack Vance. That is a heck of a stack. Gary's Gourds here. They're decent, and you've got details he gives about Greyhawk. They're not. That's what I'm saying about the Gourd series. They're not terrible. How many books did he write? 3.6. 3.6. It's not great, but it's not terrible. Oh, reference to Chernobyl. Reading Beowulf and the Song of Roland to my kids at bedtime. You're doing it right, Chris. You're doing it right. But yeah, you do get a good worldview of Greyhawk. I try not to let it super duper color it, but like the Gellers are movers and shakers in my Greyhawk campaign because of reading about them in Gary's Gore the Rogue books. Anyway, let me tell you something. Speaking of parenting right, Chris says he's reading Beowulf and Song of Roland to his kids at bedtime. 3 things children need to be told. I love you. Always do your best. Communism has failed every time it has been attempted. Just follow those 3 lines and you're parenting right. But anyway. So that is my little final rant on Appendix N. I know I've talked about Appendix N before, but I thought, well, today, because we're talking about influences of it in D&D as part of the D&D lessons, it merited going over one more time. So that's it. That's what I have to say for Appendix N. And I think you guys have got a lot of reading homework to do now. I hope you've got a lot of reading homework to do now, because there are some phenomenal works of literature in Appendix N. Just again, don't think that you've got to do some deep dive and reread all of those books. I'm never going to come at you and say, you'll understand this rule if you read John Bellaire's The Face and the Frost, and I'm not going to go into any further details. You know why, because I know you've read that. Gary didn't do that to us in the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, or the Monster Manual. So many people think that if they come to something obscure, it must mean that they have to go and they have to go and track down some of these novels. And some of them aren't that easy to find. Some of them are not super easy to find. But that's not the case. The rules are the rules. These are suggestions. And think about the fantasy cinema that has come. I mean, Gary probably could have written a book on fantasy cinema just in 1980. Not fantasy cinema of 1980, but all the fantasy cinema that had been produced in his life that he had watched and enjoyed back in the year 1980. Think about what's come since then. I mean, I've argued that Lady Hawk and the animated Aladdin movie from Disney, you know, the good one, are perfect Dungeons and Dragons movies. I can pick out along the way every class, everything that happens that, you know, in a D&D context in those. But I don't, because I want my friends to actually enjoy the movies and not, you know, politely scoot away from me when I start explaining how Navarre is in fact a paladin and the Bishop of Aquila is lawful evil. He's fallen away from God. You know, I don't want to completely wig out on people there. But it's not just books, you know. Think about all of the great fantasy film. And all of the bad fantasy film. I mean, you know, Hawk the Slayer is awful. It is. Hawk the Slayer is absolutely one of the worst movies ever made. But so many D&D fans seem to love it. Then go with it. Let things like that color how your games work. You know, I have described the High Armiger, basically the Pope of the religion of Heronius in my World of Greyhawk. I describe him as looking like a mid-50s, early 60s Max von Sydow. Like that in my mind's eye. You know, that's how I see him. So I just pull up a picture of Max von Sydow from that era. Not the one where he's kicking back in a t-shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers. It's just looking very dapper, just leaning back like that. Not that one, but But there's so many different influences you can draw into your games, guys. And Appendix P is just a launch pad for cool ideas to mine. So don't think there's something secret in there. If you say all the words out and then play them backwards in Audacity or on magnetic tape or whatever, you don't hear, special instructions from Gary Gygax or anything. They're just damn fine books. And if you don't like some of them, that's okay. That's just fine. There's one or two of them in that series that I'm just like, I can't. I can't. It's okay. Like what you like. Dislike what you dislike. Chris says, I still would have loved to see the G series and modules adapted to the big screen. The technology is finally right, but with Gary gone, they'd invariably fall to the woke Hollywood types and be ruined. Yeah. Unfortunately, you're right. I mean, I don't want to take my discussion in that direction because I'm not an internet blood sports kind of guy where it's like, yeah, I know the asshole gets a lot of views, but I don't want this to be like fucking The Quartering or anything like that ever, unless there's just something too huge for me to ignore that's happening in tabletop gaming that would require that kind of screeching on my part. But yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot of things that make the G series fun, modern filmmakers and studios would say, oh, well, no, we're going to have to change that. That's not going to work with our current audience. And we know who the bad guys in the G series ultimately are, right? Think about the treatment that's gotten lately. That wouldn't go at all. So, just some good food for thought for you guys, I hope, for some inspirational reading. I will say this. There is an Against the Giants novel, a Descent into the Depths novel, and a Queen of the Demon Web Pits novel. I think they're all by Paul Kidd. The G books start out really strong, and it's like after the first third of the book, which would cover... I feel like the writer really wanted to write an epic, like Lord of the Rings sized novel. And he started writing that. And the folks at TSR came to him and said, no, we need this book done in like 6 months, not in a year and a half. It needs to get done right now. So the book starts winding up epically for the first 40% of the book, and then the 3 modules and all the plot is resolved in the last 60% of the book. The book's only like 250 pages, maybe 275 pages. It's like this kind of paperback sized, and it's supposed to cover the story of all 3 G series modules. So, unfortunately, that's just where we're at when it comes to novelization. But anyway, they're good, dumb fun. If you can find them, they're very expensive. They're not worth the money that people are asking for them now, unfortunately. But there was a whole series of classic Greyhawk adventures. There was the Against the Giants, the Descent, and Queen of the Demon Web in novel form, Tomb of Horrors, White Plume Mountain, and I'm not sure if any of the others were written as novels, but you might check those out. So that's, I think, where we're going to leave it. Tomorrow, we'll have recap. Remember, those of you that have been following along, the party is now on their way, potentially, to try and discover the lost caverns of Sojkoth. Will they? What will become of them? And what will happen if they do? So tomorrow, we will talk about their first steps on that journey. Regardless, we'll talk about what went on in the game, but we will hopefully launch that. So you guys have an absolutely stellar rest of your day. Thanks for stopping by. Love you all. Good to see you. Thanks, Mike, over on Facebook, for engaging. Thank you guys for some great commentaries today. Go read Appendix N. Find some books in there that sound interesting that you haven't already read, and give them a read. I think you'll be surprised by just how much good stuff is in there. Not just for D&D, but just good reading. Take care, guys. I love you all. Peace.